at this end. Okay, so I have used the record function on Zoom a few times, and I know that it works. Can everybody see the screen as well? I'm sharing a PowerPoint slide. The cattle raid of Cooley. Can you see that? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so just let me know if you have a problem on the chat there. And if somebody wouldn't mind just keeping an eye over on Teams, just in case anybody else arrives there. Because Maria Teresa, are you here? Yeah, I don't think Maria Teresa is here yet, so maybe she could possibly be over on Teams. So yeah, if somebody could keep an eye out over there, that would be perfect. Okay, so anyway, I'm gonna get started. So we're going to be talking about Irish mythology tonight, and I'm going to be talking about specifically a few different stories. So the first one that I'm going to be talking about is probably the most famous mythological story in Ireland, in the Celtic tradition. So this story, the Táin, or the cattle raid of Cooley, is probably the most famous bit of literature in any Celtic language, I would say. The picture that you can see here, right, is a picture of a bronze sculpture of the main character of An Táin. His name is Cuchulainn. And you can see this statue is taken from a scene in the story, in the epic. And it's in the GPO, so it's in the General Post Office in Dublin. The GPO in Dublin is very important in the history of Irish independence as well, because it was from there which the Irish Republic was declared in 1916. So anyway, like I said, this story, this piece of epic poetry, it was originally written in Irish, right? So you can see the name of it there in the top right hand corner is An Táin, so Táin Bo Cúlainne. Cúlainne means of Cooley. So Cooley is a place in County Louth, which is in the province of Ulster. But it's a part of the Republic of Ireland today, so it's not in Northern Ireland. But they have, it's the same sort of accent, if you like, as the people in the rest of Ulster. So anyway, it's a very, very famous piece of writing, and originally it was written down first in the Irish language. I'm going to talk about the dates when it was written down a little bit more later on. But suffice to say that An Táin, first of all, before it was written down, it existed for probably many centuries as an oral tradition. So just like if you look at the Homeric epics that you have in ancient Greek, the Iliad, for example, that probably, well, historians think that existed as a spoken oral tradition, which was passed down, a poem that was passed down from generation to generation for several generations before eventually, the person that history has come to know as Homer wrote it down. We're not really sure if a person called Homer actually existed. So it's the same with Táin Bo Cúlainne. Now the other word, the second word, bo, B-O fada, that is the Irish for cattle or for cows, the plural of cows. And you'll see that cows, and having herds of cattle, having herds of bulls, for example, having big bulls in your possession or in your territory was a great sort of mark of wealth in ancient Ireland. So, and also you can see that the cow held a very important place in the folklore and mythology of the ancient Celts, but also ancient European peoples. Like there's a lot of folklore attached, for example, to the bull in ancient Greece. Also over in India, you know, of course, the people from northern India who spoke Hindi. Hindi is an Indo-European language as well. So those people, they sort of got their tradition of holding the cow sacred from the same place where the Celts made the cow sacred. So the cows, and particularly bulls, were very important in mythology. So a lot of our rivers in Ireland, for example, the River Boyne, you can see that the River Boyne, which is one of the biggest rivers in the country, and it's the river through which flows through Tara, where the High Kings of Ireland were crowned. So Boyne comes from the word cow. You can probably see the connection there, the bo fada, you know, bow in Irish. And Boine is, you know, the god of cows. It was actually the goddess of cows. And the origin story of the River Boyne involves a cow as well. So there was a cow where people would go and they would get milk from this cow, and then one day the cow sort of exploded and it turned into this river. You have a similar origin story with the River Lee that goes through Cork, and Lee is what you call a young cow or a calf, and also the River Shannon too. And then Tyne is the word for wealth. Okay, now if you're living in Ireland, you'll probably have heard of the Taoiseach, who's the person that's you know, in charge of the country, is what we call the Prime Minister in Ireland on Taoiseach. But the person who's second in command is called An Tánaiste. Okay, so An Tánaiste is it comes from the word tán. There's also a phrase that people say in Irish when they're saying cheers. They say is fearr an tánaiste, or is fearr an sláinte ná an tánaiste. So tánaiste, that word comes from cattle raiding, but in this context, in the context of that proverb, it means wealth. So basically the translation is fearr sláinte ná tánaiste is health is better than wealth. Okay, so guys, can everybody hear me okay? Can you let me know?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks. Feel free to stop me as well at any point if you have a question. And remember, I'm going to give you the slides as well at the end, so you'll be able to go there and get them. Okay, so all right, so anyway, let's find out about this story, right? So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay, actually, no, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, here we go. So this story, right, one of the main characters in this story, on Tyne, or the cattle raid of Cooley, involves Queen Maeve. Now, in Celtic society, women had a more important role, much more important role in society than they did, let's say, in Greco-Roman culture, right? So in Greco-Roman culture, women were the possession of, first of all, their fathers and then their husbands. Okay, but in Celtic culture, women had a lot more independence. So women could get divorced from their husbands if they weren't happy with the marriage. Also, women were warriors. Women would fight alongside men. That wasn't unusual. So, you know, the idea of women not being able to take part in soldiery is something that comes from the Greco-Roman tradition. It's not something that was around when the Celts existed. Okay, so you can see Maeve here. She's being depicted with her sword and her shield. Now Maeve was the Queen of Connacht, right? So we have 4 provinces in Ireland. We have Connacht, we have Ulster, we have Munster and Leinster. So she was the Queen of Connacht, which is the province in the west of the country. And Connacht at the time was one of the wealthiest kingdoms. And Connacht's main rival for the purposes of this story is the kingdom of Ulster. Okay, now this story comes from the Fiannaíocht tradition. So this is mostly based on stories that came from the northern part of Ireland. Okay. This painting, by the way, a lot of the paintings that I'm going to show you in this presentation tonight, they've come from the 19th century Gaelic revival. So they were all painted sort of either at the end of the 19th century or the first couple of years of the 20th century. Maria Teresa, can you hear me? I've just seen her arriving there. Maria Teresa, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Sorry for being late,
No
but
problem, no problem. I'm
I
just glad you
had
found
an
us because
appointment.
I was worried that you were lost somewhere on the internet. So
No.
that's great. Okay, so
Thank
it's
you.
good.
Thank you very
So
much.
we're just over in Zoom tonight because you know, there are some accessibility issues and some people not able to see the screen when I share my screen. So anyway, we're going to see what it's like here tonight, and also I'm recording the session on here. I have a lot more experience of recording classes on Zoom than I have on Teams. So anyway, let's see how the recording goes tonight when we do it here. Okay, so anyway, this is the old Irish currency. I remember getting these £1 notes when I was a small child. You can see written on it here is Bank Ceannis na hÉireann, so the Central Bank of Ireland. And so this is a punt. So you can see the name punt here. So this is what we call a pound. Okay, and the person who's depicted here this is Queen Maeve. Okay, so this is another depiction of her from the same era as the earlier image that I showed you, but just from a different artist. And then the writing that you can see in the background is from one of the early medieval manuscripts. So one of the first times that Anton Bo Cooley was written down. So the cattle raid of Cooley was written down. And you can see some other examples as well from the text on the back of the note. So this kind of goes to show, this kind of symbolizes, if you like, for us, a couple of things. Ancient Ireland, you know, our tradition of literature and poetry and epics, but also it's important for us because, you know, women have a central role in this story. Now, so Queen Maeve is one of the most important characters in this story. Along with the character that I mentioned just before, the character whose statue we were looking at from the GPO in Dublin, Cuchulainn. Okay. So anyway, like I was saying, when this story took place, Ireland was divided up into originally 5 different provinces. So you had Ulster, Connacht, Meath, Leinster and Munster. Now, Meath is no longer, in modern Ireland, it's no longer considered to be a province. But it's interesting to note that the word for province in the Irish language, in the Celtic language, is cúgu. And what that translates into English is fifth, a fifth. Okay, so there were 5 provinces. So that's why we call them fifths. So they're called na cúgi, all right, the provinces. And Meath was the central one, and it was the one that was where the High King of Ireland was crowned. Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, the middle of the country, if you like, where approximately where Tara is. Tara is the place where the palace of the High Kings of Ireland was located. That was located in the middle of the province of Meath. Now, Meath in Ireland, if you translate it, so the Irish word is me, and it translates to the middle. Okay, so originally Meath would have been in the middle of the country. And Meath also existed in the place where it exists because it was kind of dividing the provinces of Connacht and Ulster. So they had a kind of a, you know, a buffer area in between those 2 provinces, because in this story, those 2 provinces, the provinces of Ulster and Connacht, are constantly fighting. By the way, just the Ulster, you see that each of the provinces in English, they end with ter. That comes from the Irish tír, which means country. All right, so we say for Ireland, you know, tír na hÉireann, the country of Ireland, on tír na hÉireann. So that word also exists in certain European place names. Like, for example, you know, in Germany, you have a place called, is it Münster? Is a region, I think, in Germany. There are other places with that name. So historical linguistics has told us that, you know, that tír comes from the same source. So our province, the province that we're living in, Munster, you know, is originally Moon. So what we call it in Irish is Cuaig Moon, so the 5th of Moon. And who was Moon? Well, Moon was a goddess, an ancient Celtic goddess. So yeah, so that's where all the tírs come from. Okay, but Connacht is an exception to that rule. So anyway, Queen Maeve was the queen of Connacht in the west, and then there was a king of Ulster by the name of Rory MacNiassa, and he was the monarch in Ulster. Now, both of these figures were probably never historical figures. They're more mythological figures. So Maeve probably started out, her personality probably started out as a goddess. But for the purposes of this story, or when I was told this story in school, I remember my teacher, Mr. O'Neill, came in and told us this story one day when our main teacher was sick. When I was told this story first, he presented as if all of the characters were real and this was a real historical event. By the way, just on the tradition of stories. So remember I was telling you that in the Celtic tradition, they didn't write down their epic stories, their epic poetry until very, very late, until after the arrival of Christianity. Does anybody know the reason for this?
I think that the Celtic people didn't write the story. For them was very important the oral tradition.
Yes? Exactly. So that's exactly true. So it's especially the Druids, right? The Druids were the kind of main intellectual class in the Celtic tradition. So you had Druids, not just in Ireland, but also, you know, you had them in Britain, which was a Celtic country prior to the Roman arrival, let's say, and then also Gaul. So Gaul is what the Romans called France. Okay, so they called it Gallia. And there's a connection, of course, between Gaelic and Gaul or Gallic, right? So an alternative adjective for French people is Gallic. Okay, so you can say, you know, oh, do you like Gallic cuisine? So it's just an alternative adjective for French. So Gallic and Gaul and Gaelic, these are all connected. So the people who were living in Ireland were, according to the Romans, were Gauls as well. And even probably the strongest theory, now there are experts that disagree with this, but the word Celt is a Greek word, and the word Celt is just, it comes from the Greek keltoi, and we think, or the theory is, right, that keltoi is just the Greek transliteration of geltoi or gelti. So they were originally called, you know, gelti, and then when this word was translated into Greek, it began to be rendered as keltoi. Now you'll find other theories out there, but a lot of the theories that you have on the origin of the word Celt, it comes from people who don't speak Celtic languages. So from the point of view of Celtic languages, it seems very reasonable that the word Celt or Geltoi would have produced Celtic and Gaul and all of those words. Okay, so the G and K are kind of, if you like, are kind of interchangeable. And if you look in your you know, in your sound system, like for example Underhill's chart of different sounds in the English language, you can see that the sound for G and K, they're very similar. They have the same place of articulation, they have the same form of articulation. The only difference between G and K in terms of their sounds is that one is voiced, you use your voice box, the other is voiceless. Babe, could you get the light from inside? 1 second there, I'm just asking my my girlfriend there to bring me the light because it's going completely dark here. I can just see 2 lights here where my glasses are, so you'll be able to see me a little bit better. But anyway, the other theory, by the way, where the word Celt came from is that the word for hidden in Irish is Celt. So like to say that something is hidden, you say tá sé fe gelt, all right, or I gelt. So Celt. So we often in Irish and in the other Celtic languages, consonants get voiced a lot of the time in a way maybe that would seem strange to speakers of other languages. Okay, so that's a bit better there. You can kind of see my face a little bit better. Okay, so so yeah, as I was saying, Celt could come from the idea, right, that the Celts were a people who would hide things, right? And this maybe could make sense as well, because as Maria Teresa was saying, the Celts and the Gauls, so Gaul and Celt you can read as being the same thing, right? That's just one is Greek and one is Roman, okay? So they're the same historical people, right? But one of the ways perhaps in which you know, Celt could have arisen, first of all, is that, you know, they were the Celtic people because they were hidden. And what was hidden? Well, their culture. So they were very superstitious about writing. They would not write down any of their history, any of their poetry, any of their culture, because their theory was, right, that if their writings got into the hands of their enemies, then these writings could be used against them. Okay, so for example, one of the things that was very important in Celtic history was you know, spells. right? So people would use incantations and spells. We were talking about that, in connection with the May Day traditions, that people would, cast spells on their neighbors. They would curse their neighbors, or, they would curse their neighbors' cows or things like that, or butter production. So, those kind of spells, those kind of incantations, or he is what we call them in Irish, Orthai accent, right? Orha or he. That's what we call spell in the Irish language today. So, if those kind of spells got into the hands of their enemies, then they could be used against them. So the Druids, who were the intellectual class, they were also the priests. So they were involved with the Celtic religions. They were also involved with, for example, being judges. So brehiv is the word for judge in modern Irish. And there were a set of laws that were used by the Celts in Ireland, which are called the Breton laws. So that comes from the word for judge. So the Druids were judges as well. And again, the laws of the Celtic society, they wouldn't have been written down. They would have been passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth. And the Celtic peoples, they had special schools where they would get the students to learn off all of the laws off by heart. So there was a special school for the judges, for the priests, the Druids. There's also a special school for the poets. So there are two classes of poets in Celtic culture in Ireland. So there were were called the Nabardna. Now you have the word bard in English, right? So people refer to Shakespeare as being, the bard. Sometimes he's called the bard, but the word bard is a Celtic word which was borrowed into English from the Celtic language. So bard is highly skilled poet. The bards were also, they had a very important role because they were in charge of the genealogy. So they would learn off by heart the poetry of their clan, of their tribe, right? So clan is another Irish word meaning, tribe or their extended family group. So they would learn off the history of their clan, of their tribe off by heart in school. So they were the bardic schools. And then also you had Nephili, or the poets. So the bards were more kind of entertainers or storytellers, and Nephili were professional poets. And the stories that we have from that time is that the bards, they would spend 7 years in their school, and they would often be kept in dark rooms where they had to just repeat all of the histories, all of the poetry, all of the genealogy, all of the stories of their tribe. Okay, so these stories were passed down, we know, for at least half a millennium until they were written down. So the Celts changed their attitude to writing only when the Christianity arrived. So Christianity arrived, and of course Christianity was the religion of the book. And wherever Christianity went, the Bible went, and literacy went with it. Now, they did have a writing system in the Celtic world. In France, we have evidence, for example, in one of the greatest sources for the period of sort of around the first century BC in Gaul, so in Gallia and modern day France, is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar wrote a book called Commentaries about his conquest and conquering of Gaul, of the various tribes that were in Gaul. I should mention, by the way, that the Celts were not one empire. They were several sort of competing tribes. Okay. So I'm just getting a message there from Maria Teresa. So yeah, the pronunciation of that is Breton. Okay, so Breton laws, and the word for judge is in modern Irish is breth. If you want to know how to spell that, the word for judge in Irish is Breithemh. There are a lot of silent letters in Irish. But anyway, in English, we say Breton and Breton laws. Okay, so that's the word, just to remind ourselves, the word for judge. And the people would go and they would learn the Breton laws off by heart. Now, the Breton laws originally, they got wrote down in the 8th century AD. So we have, very, very good evidence of them, documentary evidence of the Breton laws, but we know that they existed for a very long time before that. Now, in Julius Caesar's commentaries, Julius Caesar mentioned a few times that the Celts have the ability to read and write, that they are a literary society. So there's this notion going around, that the Celts were illiterate. This isn't true. There's lots of evidence, contemporary evidence from the Romans and from the Greeks that they could write, but they only used writing for certain specific situations. So for business transactions, for accounting, merchants, Celtic merchants would use writing. And Julius Caesar says that they would write either in Roman letters, in their own version of Roman letters, just like the Romans actually, their letters are just the Roman version of the Greek letters, or in Greek letters. So they would use the two of those writing systems, and they could do that. The merchants and business people of the ancient Celtic world would do that using foreign letters. Now, there's also an indigenous writing system that they had in Ireland, and also it was in parts of Britain as well, for example, Cornwall. And this writing system is called Ogham, right? So it's Ogham. And Ogham is a form of writing that you have there's in UCC in the quad, if you're walking around the corridors, so there's the corridors, and the corridors have Ogham stones. Now, those stones have they have people's names written on them. Okay, so it was used in that situation to mark somebody's territory. Okay, so people used Ogham to mark their territory, mark the extent of their kingdom. So this would be to warn other people from other tribes or other clans coming into their territory. They may also have been used to in the place of where, a burial happened. So we have, burial mounds, or what are called cairns, C-A-R-N. So a cairn is sort of a burial mound. Often they were made with stones. So they would place one of these standing stones next to the burial cairn to mark the name of the person who was buried there. So the only evidence that we have of Ogham being used, we have evidence of it being used over several hundred years. And this is all pre-Christian, now pre-arrival of Christianity to Ireland. But it's all only in those situations, only in the situation of marking people's territory or marking graves, so like gravestones. But, they didn't write anything else down. So that is because of their superstitions of it. So anyway, when these stories, when An Táin Bó Cúailnge was written down, the cattle raid of Cooley was written down for the first time, it was several hundred years after the arrival of Christianity. So of course, when Christianity arrived with St. Patrick, but there were also people who came before St. Patrick. There were papal legates that were sent before, and there were other missionaries that came to Ireland after. So before this time, it wasn't as if, you know, Christianity arrived and everybody became Christian overnight. It was a process of, you know, several generations, and it took a while for superstitions about writing down things in the Bardic schools or in the schools of the Bretons or in any of the other Celtic institutions. It took a while for them to feel comfortable, or for those superstitions to die away. But eventually it started to happen, you know, like particularly in things related to Christianity, you know, they started writing straight away. We also believe as well, or there's a strong theory that the people who became the first Christians or Christian ministries or ministers in Ireland, that they came from the same class as the Druids and the judges, Nembretic, right, as well. That's a plural for judges in Ireland. The reason that is a reasonable thing to believe, right, is that almost as soon as Christianity arrived in Ireland, the Irish started exporting Christianity. So if you look at the times, St. Patrick, according to tradition, St. Patrick arrived in Ireland in the year 432 AD. The first ever missionaries, you know, they started leaving Ireland in the beginning of the 500s. So it's a very short period. You know, if you think like Ireland going from being a pagan country to, you know, a country that would export Christianity, it happened very, very quickly. Now, the reason that I say that is because, you know, when St. Patrick arrived in Ireland, when his contemporaries before and after him, when other missionaries came and brought Christianity to Ireland, Christianity was under threat elsewhere in the Greco-Roman Empire. So barbarian tribes were coming and they were taking over Western Europe, and they were pagans, right? So those Germanic peoples that were coming, they were pagan peoples. So Europe started to be overtaken with you know, pagan peoples, and Christianity very much died out in places like France. So in France you had the Franks. So the Franks were a Germanic tribe who came and took over that territory. You had the Goths, Goths. I'm not talking about the people who paint their faces white and put on red lipstick and black eyeshadow or something like that. I'm talking about the ancient Germanic tribe. So the Goths as well. The Visigoths came to places like Spain and Portugal and also Italy. And then you had the Ostrogoths, who were like, Visi is for Western Goths, Visigoths, and then the Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths, came to places like the Baltics, and you know, places like the former Republic of Yugoslavia, northern Greece, and places like that. Okay, and then you had other peoples like the Vandals. The Vandals took over the territories of Italy. And, you know, you had lots of other tribes, like, for example, the Alemanni, that gives the name for the French word for Germany today, and the Spanish word as well, I believe, for Germany. You also had the Burgundians, and you had several different tribes. So the Vandals, they came from the East, basically, like everybody else. We don't know, history doesn't know much about the Vandals. There isn't any region with that name. And I don't know why we call, you know, like vandalism, the destruction of public property. I don't know why we name it after that tribe. But yeah, history doesn't know where they came from exactly. So it's sort of a mystery. You know, what we do know though is that there was a continuous invasion or coming of, sometimes they weren't invaders, you know, they were looking for land, but there was a constant sort of migration, if you like, of tribes coming from the east, you know, from the Greco-Roman tradition. You know, they would call all of these groups barbarians because they wore beards. They had a, you know, barbari. They is the word that they would have used. So we don't really know too much about them, but we know that there were lots and lots of different tribes that were coming over, the Saxons, and a lot of them, you know, have given their names to countries. Like, so for example, the Franks, they learned the Latin language, but they also kept elements of their own language, and that country became Francia, and later Francia. And they started learning what they call Latin, but it would have been maybe Proto-French at that stage, some kind of intermediary between Latin and the French language in the later Middle Ages, like the 8th century AD. And then you had people like Charlemagne, you know, or Carlos Magnus, as he is known in Latin, who were like, he was the emperor of, you know, modern day, the territory that's occupied by modern day France, Belgium, probably Netherlands as well, Western Germany, Northern Italy, that sort of territory. So Charlemagne, we call him in English, which is the French word for him. But Charlemagne was illiterate. So even though, you know, he comes from the high aristocracy, he was illiterate. So that, and it goes to show the high levels of illiteracy that you had in Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, into this vacuum, you had the territory of Ireland. So Ireland was never conquered by the Romans, but it was Christianized by them. So Ireland became a kind of an outpost for Christianity. So when Germanic tribes as well came and they took over what was the ancient Roman kingdom of Britannia, Britain. So you had the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, right? According to the historical tradition, they're the three principal Germanic tribes that came to England. When they took over that territory there, and they were pagan, and they pushed, you know, the Celts to the west, you know, to places like Cornwall and Wales, which are still places where Celtic languages are spoken today. But anyway, they were pagans. So the Celts and Celtic Christian missionaries came to re-Christianize and to perform missionary work in those kinds of places. So we have a very, very famous Christian monks from Ireland that came and did missionary work in Britain, but also elsewhere in continental Europe. So Columkill, or Columbanus, as he is known in Latin, he was probably one of the most famous ones. So he and others like him, they set up Christian monasteries all across Europe. Some of them still exist today. They evolved into universities. A well-known one, for example, is the university in, is it Leuven? You might know this, Jelska, you know, in Belgium. It's in modern-day Belgium, but I think in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, Leuven. Is that right? Yeah. So that was originally started by Irish monks. Okay, and it was a school, just like they had schools in Ireland where they would teach reading and writing. Principally, they were schools, and these were the places where, you know, they copied out the books, right, of the old Greek and Roman traditions. So they the books of the ancient Greeks and Romans, as well as the Christian literature, these were copied in the monasteries, and reading and writing was taught based on these classical works in a lot of those monasteries that were set up by some of these Irish monks. Okay, so Leuven would be one example of them, but there are several other examples in Germany, northern Italy, Spain, and these connections that were started with Ireland continued for a very long time. So Leuven still has a strong connection. It still gets grants, you know, from the Irish government. You know, it's still got an Irish college there. And there are other examples. Maybe some of you know of other universities that were, yeah, there's also an Irish college where you can spend the night. Yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of these Irish colleges, like when I went to, I did stage in Paris. And I was staying in the Irish college in Paris when I was there for just a couple of nights. So often they would act as hostels as well. Yeah, so you should all go there after COVID has disappeared. Good idea. So maybe some of you, you know, maybe you might know of some Irish connections to other universities in Western Europe, but there are several of them. Columbanus is, or Columcille, as we know him in Irish. He is quite well known in the Latin-speaking world as well, because he wrote. He was kind of a fortune teller or a psychic, and he wrote about the end of the world. And there's a lot of interest in it at the moment, because Columcille, he wrote a story about the last three popes, and the third last one, he said, was going to be born on a solar eclipse, and he would die on a solar eclipse as well. And Pope John Paul II was born on a solar eclipse and died on a solar eclipse as well. But actually, look, solar eclipses happen quite regularly, but you know, anyway, that's part of the tradition. So the third last one would be born and would die on a solar eclipse. Then the second last one would have a strong connection to the Mount of Olives, and we know that the Benedictines have a monastery on the Mount of Olives today, and they always have had a strong connection with the Mount of Olives just outside of Jerusalem. And you know, he called himself Benedict the 16th. So that's according to the tradition anyway. That was who he was talking about when he mentioned the Mount of Olives as having a strong connection with the second last pope. And then the last pope, and this is the last pope for the end of the world according to this tradition, the last pope was Peter of Rome. So anyway, we didn't have Peter of Rome. He called himself Francis instead. So, but other people are saying that another pope is going to come called Peter of Rome. So anyway, that's Columbanus, who spent some time in Rome as well, and he published works that were written in Latin. So he's well known in the Latin-speaking world. So anyway, that was a bit of an aside, but it gives you some of the background into why the Celts were superstitious about writing things down. So anyway, let's get on with the story. So a long time ago, Queen Maeve was the queen of Connacht. So one day she had an argument with her husband. Her husband was Ailill, but this is the first mention of her husband and the last mention of her husband in this story. Okay, so anyway, she had an argument about who was richer. Now remember, women could hold property as well as men in the Celtic world. Okay, as soon, like in the Greco-Roman world, when you got married, you know, you became your husband's property. You couldn't hold any property yourself. There was no divorce. But for example, in the Celtic world, there was divorce, and if you got divorced, then you got to keep your property as well. Okay. So anyway, they had an argument about which one of them was richer. They compared their property with one another. They turned out to have the exact same amount of riches except for one possession. So Ailill had a great bull. So he had this huge bull. So I have the great Fionn Vanach, right? So Fionn Vanach was the name of his bull. And Fionn is sort of light colored or blonde. There's another mythological figure called Fionn McCool, and he had blonde hair. So Fionn, Fionn, is the word for blonde or light colored hair. And we know that in the stories from the Celts that everybody was blonde. They had a high degree of people being blonde, a higher degree than we have in Ireland today, according to experts in the Celtic mythologies. Also, guys, interestingly, in the Greek mythologies, the Greeks were blonde. And also in the old stories of the Romans, or even if you look at the Roman emperors, there were a lot of Roman emperors who were blonde. So it takes a while for people's skin color and their hair color to change. So obviously, if you're living in a place like Greece or in southern Italy, you know, it's going to be more advantageous from an evolutionary point of view to have darker skin because they have more sun there. But so that may be what must have happened. You know, like I read in one paper that it takes about 30 generations, so 30 generations for people's hair color to change. Not just individuals. I'm talking about, you know, a nation for their hair color to change. So like the modern Italians are kind of darker skinned and they usually have dark hair. Now there are still some people with blonde hair in Italy, but the majority, let's say, would have darker features, and the same would be the true of the Greeks today. So apparently, according to this paper that I read, it takes about 30 generations for this change to happen. So in the Homeric epics, and also like in the stories about Alexander, you know, Alexander had blonde hair. Also, his father had blonde hair. So it's the same thing in the Celtic story. So the conclusion is that maybe originally the Indo-European peoples had kind of more blonde hair than darker hair. They would have still been blonde. Their ancestors in Greece and Rome would have still been, you know, mostly having blonde hair up until maybe, you know, the later medieval period, maybe the 800s AD or something like that. That's the theory. But I just thought I'd mention that a lot of characters seem to have blonde hair in these Celtic epics. Okay, so anyway, Alil had this great bull called Fionn Vanach. So Ursa Alil le Maeve is said Alil to Maeve, right? I forgot to translate that part from Irish. Sorry about that. So you have no animal like that, he said. And Maeve was absolutely disgusted. She was extremely jealous, and she decided then and there to acquire a bull of equal magnificence to her husband. Okay. So anyway, if you go to Connacht today, you will see that there is this statue in Connacht, and the statue is of Fionn Vanach. Okay, so the historical area where Queen Maeve is from, where her palace was, and where this bull that inspired this war that we're going to read about, that still exists, and there's a statue, a bronze statue of a bull there today. Okay, you can get your picture taken with it. Also, the bull that she goes after, there's a depiction of that bull in County Louth, right? There's a giant sort of representation of it on a hill, and you can see it kind of in silhouette when you pass. And there have been lots of different translations as well of Táin Bó Cúailnge from Irish into English. There's loads and loads of different versions of it. One of the ones that I recommend if you want to read the full story is by Kieran Carson here, or at least the one where he does an introduction to it. Okay, and here's a representation as well of the other bull, the bull in the eponymous bull, so the bull in the title on Táin Bó Cúailnge, the one that Maeve goes looking for. So this is another bronze statue, and this is in County Louth as well. So anyway, the story is, right, that Maeve was very angry, you know, that her husband had this very expensive bull. She wanted to have one as well. She went to her druids to ask where she could find a bull of similar stature, of similar size, and of similar value and expense. And he said in the only place you can find it is in the Kingdom of Ulster, in a place called Cooley in modern day County Louth. So that's what she decided to do. So she sent, first of all, right, she sent her her main druid, right, his name is Fergus MacRoth. So Fergus was sent up to Louth, to Cooley, to ask the King of Ulster for his bull, right, to ask Rory MacNassa for his bull. Rory refused to give the bull, to sell it under any circumstances. And so he brought the bad news back to Maeve. Maeve was then very angry, and she decided to lead an army, right? So here you can see this is Maeve on horseback here. So she decided to lead an army to capture the bull by force, right? And that's what a táin is. It's a cattle raid. Okay, so where you go and you steal the cattle of your neighbor or of a rival king. Okay, so that's how the story starts. Okay, so anyway, Conor MacNassa, I was saying Rory, I think Conor MacNassa was the king of Ulster, and he had a band of elite soldiers called An Chraobh Rua, right? So An Chraobh Rua. An Chraobh Rua means the red branch. Okay, and in the modern day Irish Army, the elite section of the Irish Army is still called An Chraobh Rua, or the red branch. So these were very legendary soldiers. They were extremely skillful. One of the things that you had to be able to do when you were a member of this elite group of soldiers on Chraobh Rua was you had to be able to tie your shoes. They had like shoes that laced up the leg, sort of, you know. So you had to be able to tie them while you were running at full pace. So you had to be extremely skillful. It was a really elite group of soldiers. So Conor MacNassa, he had an advantage in that he had this elite group of soldiers that he could put into battle against Maeve, right? But Maeve had her own very powerful soldiers, her own very powerful army, and a very powerful warrior as well that you will find out about. Now, probably the most powerful member of An Chraobh Rua was Cuchulainn. So Cuchulainn, I'm going to tell you briefly, right, where he got his name from. Okay, so Cuchulainn, the word C-U accent, or C-U, we call this a Sheena Fada, or a long stretch, right? Sheena Fada, or in English, people refer to them as fadas, which means long. So they're in words in Irish that have long sounds. So we have short sounds and we have long sounds when it comes to vowels. So we have k, for example, and ku. We have, you know, e, and we have a, we have u, we have u, we have a, and we have a. Okay, so we have these long sounds. So those long sounds are called fadas. So it has C, and then it has a U fada, or a long U sound. Okay, and that word chu means dog or a hound. And Colin is somebody's name. It's not the name of Cuchulainn. When he was a child, he was called Setanta. So that was the name that he was given when he was born. Now, you can think of Cuchulainn as being the same as Hercules or Heracles, okay? So a lot of these stories are very similar because we believe that they came from the same original Indo-European origin. Okay, now Hercules, you might remember, or Heracles, as he's known in the Greek tradition, was a demigod. So he was the mixture of a human mother and a male deity, a male father. So it's the same in the tradition of Cuchulainn. His father was a person called Lugh, L-U-G-H, right? And it's where County Louth comes from, right? So Cúnta Lugh, we call it in Irish, right? County Louth. It's the county where Cooley is based. Okay, so that's named after Lugh. And also the Roman province, right, which is in modern day Portugal and Galicia, the Roman province of Lusitania was named after Lugh as well. And also the French city of Léon was named after Lugh too. So anyway, Lugh, and Lugh gives his name to the Celtic month of Lunasa, which is August in English. So anyway, he was the son of the god Lugh. But his name was Setanta, and he was kind of a very strong character, great warrior, a bit like Hercules was. But Cuchulainn was a blacksmith, right? What we call a gowra. So you have the surname McGowan in Ireland today. That's the Irish equivalent of smith, right, or blacksmith. So the person who makes weapons, right? That was very important because we think that the Celts were possibly the people to first bring and first have the culture of having iron products, iron implements, tools, iron, and principally iron weapons, the iron sword. So using iron with a little bit of carbon to make a steel sword, we think that that involves a lot of engineering skill. So the blacksmiths were kind of like, they had a very, very high position in society. So Colin was the royal blacksmith of the king, Conor MacNessa. And one day the king invited Setanta when he was a young child, right? They invited him to come and to go to Colin's house, right? So the king and a lot of the king's subjects were at home, and he invited Setanta to come there. Now, when Setanta arrived, Colin had this dog. He had this Coo, which was a very fierce dog, a very dangerous dog. The dog was huge. So when Setanta arrived at Colin's house, the dog came out, and the dog was very vicious, and he came to attack him. Now, if you were visiting somebody's house, you couldn't bring a weapon, but Cuchulainn did have a hurley, right, that he's holding in his hand for the ancient Celtic game of hurling, and he did have a slitter. He was always playing hurling. He was an extremely talented hurler. So what he did was, when the dog was attacking him, he fired the slitter. So he hit the slitter with the hurley and fired it at the dog. And the story is that the slitter hit the dog in his mouth, breaking his jaw and going through the dog's brain. So he killed the dog with the slitter, basically. And when Colin saw what happened to his dog, to his hound, his guard dog, Colin was extremely angry, and he was going to punish. He wanted to punish Setanta, the young Setanta. But the king intervened because the king knew, that Setanta was going to be one day a great warrior. So anyway, the agreement was made that that Setanta would become the guard dog of Colin. So he would take the place of the guard dog, if that makes sense, right? So he became a human guard dog, if you like. So that's where he got his name, Cuchulainn. So it means the guard dog or the hound of Colin. Okay, so he lost his original name, Setanta, and then he became Cuchulainn. So there are even video games, you know, about Cuchulainn. Here's a representation of him, and the representation of him with the Hound of Ulster. So he got that name, and he became more famous as Cuchulainn instead of Setanta after that. Okay, so and then Cuchulainn was in on Craobh Rua, and here's a depiction. This is again from a video game, right? From the video game that you saw above, of the Knights of the Red Branch. So you can see them taken from there. Yeah. So in answer to your question, I think it was Yelska who asked that question. She said, where were the pictures from slide 9 taken from? So they're taken from a video game. So the video game there is called Cuchulainn. Okay, so it's based on, they're both screenshots from the video game. Okay, yeah, so that's where I got them. So the slide that I'm on at the moment and the slide before, right, this particular slide, this is from the artwork of this video game. This photograph here is taken from County Louth. So it's in County Louth. I think it's near to the town of Dundalk, which is the capital city of County Louth. And this particular picture is from a school book, right? So this story, we learn about Cuchulainn when we're very young. So everybody gets taught about that when they're very young in school. I think I was about maybe 6 or something when I was first told the story of Cuchulainn. So I was told about Cuchulainn using you know, pictures like that. So it's taken from one of the school books that I had when one of the primary school books. I can't remember the name of it, but if you need to know, I can find it out. I should have done that actually. I should have put the sources to these images on the slide. So sorry about that. But anyway, if you're curious about any of the origins of the slides, I can tell you. Okay, so this picture, this image as well, is taken from that video game that I was talking about, and so is this one as well. All right, so the picture of the Red Branch Knights. Okay, and remember that was that elite group of knights that the King of Ulster had. So Cuchulainn was the leader, or the most powerful warrior in the Red Branch. Okay, so anyway, yeah, they probably are terrifying for a kid. Yeah, I'm not a video game player, so like I found those images because I was just doing a Google image search, and these are the things that kind of came up. But yeah, I agree. They're pretty terrifying for a kid, but also I suppose they're useful for my purposes. They're quite evocative. But Celtic knights of that period did wear armor. So, you know, it's you know, like they were early medieval, like it's from the early medieval period or late antique period where metal armor started to be used more widely. So I think it is kind of good in that way. So this gives you some idea of what the knights would have looked like. Okay, so anyway, a war took place between the armies of Ulster and Connacht. Maeve herself was fighting. Maeve's greatest warrior, his name was Fergia, right? He was fighting as well. Cuchulainn was fighting. And this fight went on for several days. Anyway, there was no winner in particular. Here's a picture. This is from a 19th century painting as well of Cuchulainn. I took this from the Wikipedia page, the Wikipedia entry on Cuchulainn, but this was painted by somebody during the Celtic revival in the late 19th century. One thing that maybe you won't realize, or people don't realize about the Celts. The Celts were expert charioteers.
Oh.
And we think that they probably, when I speak about the Indo-European peoples, the Indo-European peoples, they have the Indo-European language, right, has been reconstructed. Okay, so Proto-Indo-European, and they've reconstructed the vocabulary. And one of the things that we know about the Indo-Europeans is they had native words for things like wheel, axle, things to do with basically transportation. So we think that the Indo-European peoples, or at least it's reasonable that they may have been the people to develop the wheel and wheel-based trade and economics. Right, that's one theory that's out there that I have read several academic papers on. There's no absolute proof of it, but you know, there's some archaeological evidence as well coming from the steppes, or you know, like Central Asia, the homeland of the Indo-European peoples, that suggest that the wheel could have been invented there, and that could have been the reason why the Indo-European languages spread so quickly, that they were spread, you know, along the roads that these wheeled objects were taking. So principally the wheel was used for economic purposes, you know, to sell excess grain, sell excess wheat or excess barley or excess oats. But also the wheel was very useful for military purposes, for the chariot. And we know that the Celts were excellent charioteers. And being able to prove yourself on a chariot was very important. So yeah, so a question coming in again, I think it's from Yelska. So a charioteer, right? I'll just write that word there. So a chariot is the thing that Cuchulainn is on there. And the person who rides a chariot is a charioteer. Okay, so the Celts were excellent charioteers. We even think that the word chariot is a Celtic word.
Oh.
There's strong evidence to suggest that, you know, the Romans, they loved chariot racing, but that their tradition of doing chariot racing comes from the Celts. It was imported into the Roman world from contact with Celtic peoples in northern Italy. This is the theory anyway, right? So yeah, so one of the important things that you would have to do if you were a warrior in ancient Ireland was to prove yourself on a chariot. So that's why, you know, I'm showing you a representation here of Cuchulainn on a chariot. So that would have been very important. So we think of the chariot as something coming from Egypt or coming from you know, the East. For the Celts, it was something that was very indigenous for them, but it may have been that it was just invented by the ancestors of the Indo-European peoples, and that's why the Greeks and the Romans and other European peoples had chariots and had the wheel and had economies and trade based on the wheel. Also, guys, in this picture, you can see, right, there's a picture of a crow here, right? Can you see that? Okay, and the crow represents a goddess of war, right? Her name, or the name, is Crave Jarrag, right? So, or Crave Juv, sorry, Black Claw. So it's kind of, it's the Celtic version of Mars or Hades, right? So sometimes that goddess is represented in human form, but at other times is represented as a black crow or a raven. Okay, So anyway, that's why the raven is in the picture there. So anyway, that's Cuchulainn in battle during the war against Maeve's forces. Okay, but anyway, the battle went on for a very long time, and it came down to the stage that there were, you know, basically two people left alive, and it was Fergia, who you can see represented in this picture here. Okay, so this is from a book, and Fergia, a book from a secondary school book, and in Ireland. So so this is from, yeah, and I think I can't remember the name of the book. It's the same book anyway, where the other picture came from. So anyway, Fergia was the fiercest warrior of Connacht, and he had a magical skin of horn, which no blade could pierce. So his foster brother was Cuchulainn. Okay, now remember, Cuchulainn, his father was Lugh. So his father wasn't around, you know, he was a god, so he had better things to be doing. So he was an orphan. His mother died when he was quite young, and he was the foster brother then of Fergia. So they were great friends. Okay, now you can see there, it's kind of giving the story away, right, that the two of these foster brothers had a battle that lasted several days. Now they didn't want to fight one another because they were friends. They had grown up together. They, you know, they loved one another. They would often practice, you know, their fighting skills with one another, but they swore that they would never fight each other. So Fergia did not want to fight Cuchulainn, and Cuchulainn did not want to fight Fergia. Now, Fergia had this kind of cloak that, you know, no metal object could pierce, right? But Cuchulainn had a weapon as well. Now, this weapon is one of the other mythological weapons that were brought by the ancestors of the Celts to Ireland. So this was called An Ga Bolaga. So it was the spear of pain, or the spear of mortal death. Okay, so Cuchulainn had this weapon. And anyway, the fight went on, and it went on for days and days. And we still know the place where this fight went on, right? You can see, right, there's, if you look at this picture here, this is next to the river where the battle took place, right? So there's a statue here of Cuchulainn taking his friend and the warrior that he was fighting against, Fergia. He's taking him out of the water, you know, to give him a warrior's burial. But you can click on that video as well when you're going through the presentation. But it's on a river in County Louth, just near Drogheda, so very close to the town of Drogheda. If you click on that link, it will show you exactly where the river is. But you can go and you can, you know, like a lot of tourists will take a picture of themselves next to the statue. So Fergie is the person who has just been killed, and he was killed by An Ga Bolaga. So the spear of death, or the spear of pain. Here's another representation of him. This is from a 19th century painting from the Gaelic revival. I took this as well from the Wikipedia page. You can find it on there. And it's another representation of Cuchulainn carrying Fergia out of the river. You can see that Cuchulainn in this one is represented kind of more like a Viking. That wasn't very historical. What was maybe historical though was the fact that, you know, Cuchulainn is depicted as having a long mustache. We know that that is true because of the writings of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar wrote about the leader of the Gauls in the fight against the Roman forces in the battle of the final battle of Gaul. Was somebody called Vercingetorix. At least that's the Latin name for him, Vercingetorix. And Vercingetorix had, we know from Julius Caesar's description of him, that he had a long moustache. So the Celts did have long moustaches like that. So this is less historically accurate, probably. But in actuality, we know what the Gauls of France look like. Maybe the Gauls of Ireland look the same. Maybe they look different. We don't know. So that, you know, this one may be correct as well. But anyway, so that's the battle, and it was the Gaul Bolig that won the battle eventually for Cuchulainn. By the way, that was a way of settling battles often. You know, that there would be two armies would meet, and then instead of fighting one another, the greatest warrior of each army would face each other one-to-one in one-to-one single combat. And then the winner of that single combat won the war. There are lots of records of the Celts and the Romans fighting, and that was how the battles were settled, by single combat. There's also a representation of it. If you've ever seen the film of Troy, there's a representation of single combat in that film in a similar way. So you can imagine this single combat as happening in a similar way. So like a lot of the greatest warriors were killed, but there were still some armies left. Some of the remainder of the army of Connacht and the remainder of the army of Ulster. But the war went on, right? So Cuchulainn continued to fight. Cuchulainn also had this power where he would go into this kind of crazy kind of rage, like, you know, like the Vikings. The word in Old Norse is berserk, or it gives us the English word berserk, where the warrior goes into like a crazy kind of rage and starts like losing his mind, but also kind of killing everybody. After Cuchulainn murdered his great friend Fergia, he went into a rage and killed loads and loads of the soldiers of the army. He took on the army on his own, the army of Connacht. But eventually he was killed after several injuries. So, but when he was killed, right, he went to a place in County Louth where you have this standing stone. It's still there today. And the story is that when Cuchulainn was dying, he tied himself onto this stone so that he would be seen standing up. So when the armies of Connacht came to Ulster, they would see him and they would think that he's still alive, and they would not attack. Right? So that's what he did basically. Right? So he tied himself onto the stone so that even when he died, he would look like he was still standing and he would look like he's still alive. You can see the Celtic goddess of war is represented by a raven up there as well. Okay, so you can click on the location as well. I put the Google Maps location of that standing stone where, according to legend, Cuchulainn died. So that still exists, and you can go there and you can visit it too. And it's up in County Louth. And that's where, you know, the depiction of Cuchulainn in the GPO, this bronze depiction of him, that's where it is located. Okay, and that's what it's depicting as well. So you can see, look, that he's tied himself to the rock there. And you have the raven as well on his shoulder, who represents the goddess of war. Okay, so that's the story of the great brown bull of Cooley. So she managed to get the great brown bull eventually, and but the great brown bull is said to have died on the way back. So when it was taken out of Ulster, it just collapsed and died. So Maeve wasn't able to have it in the end. So how old is this story? Well, it was first written down, as you can see here in the image, in the 7th and 8th century, so probably the 600s. The Celts arrived in Ireland in 600 BC, so this is 600 AD we're talking about. So that's when it was written down, but we know that it existed for at least a few hundred years before that. So, you know, any time really from 200 AD back to 600 BC, or maybe even before that. But it does mention places in Ireland, so it must have been composed when the Celts were in Ireland. Or if it wasn't composed when it was in Ireland, then it was changed and adapted to Irish purposes. Okay, so anyway, what can we learn about the Celtic peoples from the story? Well, we can learn about, you know, for example, some of the place names. So the place where the river is, you know, the river where I showed you the statue, it's a very small river. So Fergia and Cuchulainn were fighting on this river, and the name of the town that this river goes through is Bala Oha Ergia. Now, Ergia is the genitive form of Fergia, so it means of Fergia. It's the possessive form. Oha is like in the Irish name for Dublin, Bala Oha Clia. Oha means ford, or the part of the river where you can cross the river. Okay, so where the river is low enough for you to be able to walk by. So this, and then Bala is town. So the town of the ford of Fergia. Okay, so this place in County Louth, right, it still exists. So it's named after Fergia, and it's named after the place where this battle took place. So you can see the statue that I showed you earlier, this one. This is in the same place, just outside that town. So it's very close to Drogheda. And I put you can see there's a video link that I put to it as well, that you can explore. Okay, so that's something that you could visit if you go up to County Louth. Okay, and there are some other place names as well, you know, with that word that you might know from around Cork. So I was telling you about Bala Oha Clia is the Irish name for Dublin. Okay, but you also have Bala Oha Loan or Athlone, which is a big city in County Galway. Right, so that again comes from the English word ford. Right, like where the English town Oxford comes from, Oxford. So yeah, that would be Oha Bo, let's say, if you translate it into Irish. And then Bala Oha E, right? E was another goddess. So maybe you know some places in Cork with that name in Irish. Maybe just for a minute, you can take a look on Google Maps and see if you can see any places with that name. Also, there are some videos of the story that you can follow. Both of these come from the Northern Ireland curriculum. So not from the Republic of Ireland curriculum, but the Northern Ireland one, and from their Irish curriculum, but I think they have subtitles in English. And the original presentation, so I adapted this presentation. Most of the slides are new ones that I put in there, but the original presentation was written in Irish by Forrest Naguelga in 2014. Okay, so that's who hold the copyright. So guys, that's it. That's the end of the story. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything like that? I can see that the recording is still happening. So that's positive anyway. Okay, and so guys, I'm just going to show you where the presentations are. Okay, so I'll just share my screen once again. Okay, because maybe some of you might want to do to listen to this again, or to see some of the videos or some of the links that I told you about. Okay, now yeah, so I'll just share my screen once again. Share screen. Okay. Okay, so if you go onto Teams, okay, and right, so this is the standard way of doing it. But I want to find out exactly and get the names of the people who can access this. So when you go on there, right, go on to block 1, term 1, and then thanks very much. Thank you, guys. I'm just seeing some of your comments coming through there. Thanks for your compliments. I really appreciate that. Maria Teresa, I want to ask you a question actually, because I heard from Carolyn that you are descended from the O'Sullivans.
Yes, I am. I am from Bear Island.
Can you tell us some more about that?
Well, I hope so. There is a king, Bera O'Sullivan Bera.
Yeah.
It was a king who organized a march against the English invaders.
Oh yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That was a very sad story, because from all the people who went to accompany, oh my God, I cannot, because my English is very poor. But anyway, from this,
are you talking about Donald Cam O'Hulawan?
Yes,
Donald
I am
Cam,
talking about him.
Yeah, so
but,
that story is a very well-known one, and I can actually I can tell that story one night as well.
Okay, you wanted my story.
Yeah, it's a very sad story, but it's a beautiful one as well. On this story, guys, for everybody else, just to inform you that we're talking to somebody. Maria Teresa is connected with an old aristocratic family called the O'Sullivan family, right? Who come from the Beara Peninsula, and this family, they were lords, and they were fighting the English this is around the same time of the Battle of Kinsale. You know, when you had the O'Neills and you had the O'Donnells fighting against the English, and then you had the Spanish helping the Gaelic Irish as well. But anyway, Donald Cam was on the side of the Gaels, of course. And unfortunately, the battle was lost, and English power became solidified in Munster. And then he had to escape from the Beara Peninsula and go to some of his friends up in a place called Breffna, which is up in County Monaghan, up in Ulster. So they had to travel, but a lot of them, you know, they didn't have horses. Some of their horses were stolen, and they ended up having to walk. Now, this is women and children and old people, all of the clan, basically, of this old aristocratic family, the O'Sullivans. They all had to travel together. And that walk as well, you might be interested, guys. I can actually show you something. If you're interested in walking, the Beara Breffna cycle route, or the Beara Breffna way, is right. So there are several sort of websites as well that you can go to, and you can find out about this old walking route or this old cycle route. But it's a very, very long one. There are several sections. It goes from one end of the country to the other, and it traces the way. This is Donald Camo o Hulavan, and that you can see in the picture there. And so the way is named after him. I'm sure you've
May I
probably
ask
heard
you?
about this way before, Maria Teresa.
Yes, yes, of course. May I ask you? It was in winter, the march.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Mm-hmm.
winter, and there are a lot of places that are named after things that happened on that walk, like fields and towns and that are named after events that happened on that walk. Because it took them like about it took them a couple of months like to walk, and there were thousands of them, probably tens of thousands of them who started walking, and only a few who arrived in the end. But anyway, if you're interested in hiking or walking or anything like that, there are lots of parts of this historical route that are located in West Cork nearby. For example, this part here is in West Cork. So is section 2. And there are also like PDFs that you can get of each of the routes that tell you some of the historical locations on the way. So if I just put in maybe hiking route here. That should hopefully find it. Anyway, there should be some PDF somewhere on the internet, maybe on this place. Find your trails. Anyway, you can explore that yourself, or otherwise I can give them to you next week if you're not able to find them. But if you're into hiking at all, you can just do small sections of it. But the PDF guides are very interesting because they show you a lot of places that you can stop at on the way. And there's also a very interesting documentary about the journey that I can share with you. Yeah, it's a radio documentary, but it's very, very well done.
Okay.
So I can share that link with you. So,
yes, thank you.
Yeah. So if you download this application, right? So it's called Documentary on One.
Yes, I have them. I have it.
Okay. So just put in there like I think it's called The Long Walk or The Long March, or put in Berna Brefna or O'Sullivan.
Okay.
Or something like that, and you should be able to find it on there.
Okay, thank you.
This is a really good app, and the documentaries on there are very, very well done and very interesting, but they're all radio documentaries done for RT Radio 1. But let me see if I can find it for you. So yeah, so Maria Teresa, you do know that that your name is a very, very important surname in Ireland.
Yes, I know that. I know that.
I'm sure you do. All the O'Sullivans do, right?
Yes, we know that.
That's great. Okay.
Yes,
so anyway, you can just search in here, and I think if I put in like O'Sullivan, should be hopefully able to find it.
And I am very proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. That's great. I'm delighted that you know about it. And how long ago? So you're from Argentina, Maria Teresa, right?
Yes, I am.
And how long ago did your ancestors come from Ireland?
Yes, they arrived perhaps in the 1880s.
1880s. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
And I came back for the first time 10 years ago.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well,
yes.
All right. I can't.
I mean, I go back. Sorry, I go back to Ireland.
When you're searching, if you just put in Cork, and then just search based on that, you should be able to find it here as you go through. So you can get ones that are just connected like to your county, And I'm sure if
Yes.
you go through that there, you will get it.
Okay, thank you.
Somewhere in there anyway. Oh yeah, no. Thought I found it there, but no.
Well, yes, but I can do it because I know the application very good, very well.
Okay.
And I know another program, the History Show, and it is very interesting.
Okay. You can also just put in Berna in there, and maybe no, it's not finding it there. Well, actually, I think it's got Cavan in there. So just put in Bear on its own, maybe. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Look.
Ah, yes. Ah, the retreat. Ah, yes, yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So you can just add it to your playlist. I'll try to share it there as well.
Thank
to
you.
Can I put it on Zoom?
I think you cannot share the screen when you want to write a message.
Okay, it's actually shared on the screen now.
Ah, okay. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, guys, just one other thing that I want to tell you about, right? Before I let you go, right? So this is where all the PDFs are of the presentations that I've been using, right? Now, I only used the first one tonight, but I can do some of the other ones as well. There are other stories that are connected with Irish mythology, or if you want, you can just have a look at them yourself. Okay.
Okay.
If you're interested. Okay, but anyway, there's several stories there. Also, session 2, you can see that I've put the MP3 of the recording on there, right?
Yes.
And then section 1 has the stuff all about, you know, the Celtic calendar. Okay, and that didn't seem to record for some reason. At least I couldn't find the recording on Teams. So yeah, just if you could write an email to me, because I'm going to send you these presentations individually. So if you can write an email to me personally, if you can't access these. Okay, so I'm just going to give you my email now, and I'll say it because some people can't maybe see the chat, or I can write it in the chat too. Okay, and then sorry, I'll just write it in chat. I can probably stop sharing my screen now. Right, I'll just write it in the chat now here. Okay, so it's Robert, and then .mccall, right, and then @ucc.ie. So just write me a message on there. Write it tonight, and then I can send you a link to these PDFs on Google instead, or something like that. I can put them on Google.
Okay.
The other thing is there's just one other document that I would like to show you as well, and that is the other talks that are coming up. When I was talking to you the other night, like after the first session, I asked you some of the areas that you were interested in. So I've based the timetable for the rest of the term on that. Okay, so let me show you the timetable. So it's on Teams, and then it should be on block 1. Oh no, it's not there for some reason. Maybe I have it on my iPad. So I can give you a link to it. So let me just open Word here. Guys, do anybody else do it, like, does anybody else have a family connection with Ireland that you know of, back through your ancestors? So here's the document anyway. I'll share this document on the chat page. Okay, now you mightn't be able to access it as well because, you know, Teams is very restrictive, as I'm sure you know, in lots of ways. So anyway, I'll put it onto Teams, to the main page of Teams, and I'll put it on as well onto our chat on Zoom. So that's the link. And on the chat as well. Oh no, sorry, I just saw there that I'm sending the messages privately by accident. So I'll send them once again. So that's my email. And that's the link. Well, sorry, one sec. I'm just going to send the link now to the program. Okay, everybody. So I'll just go through the timetable there just to show you the kind of things that are coming up over the next couple of weeks in the term. So I'll just share my screen one last time, and then I promise that's it. I'll leave you go then. Okay, so yeah, so next week we're going to do a connected topic. We were talking about it a little bit tonight, which is early Christian Ireland and St. Brendan. So we touched on aspects of early Christian Ireland next week. So then in block 2, in the first session, it's going to be all about Renaissance Cork. So classical influences on 19th century painting, sculpture, architecture, and learning, all in Cork. The influence was pretty wide, and it's a great way as well to get to know what it was like for you know, the people living in Cork City. Because often when you talk about 19th century Ireland, you know, it's all about the famine and about emigration and poverty and all of this. This shows another aspect of Cork, where, you know, it actually seemed like, for these people at least, a nice place to live. Then the session 2 is going to be about flora and fauna. So flora and fauna hibernica. So I think Jelska, you expressed interest in this topic. So I'm going to try to do at least one topic on one aspect of Irish nature in each of the blocks. We did flowers and herbal plants last week. And then in session 2 of block 2, we're going to do Irish birds. Then immigration to the Americas, you know, after the famine, but also in the years after that. And its effect on the country and on Ireland's attitude to itself, and the Irish diaspora as well around the world, not just in, of course, North America and Australia, but also in places like Argentina. And I know, Maria Teresa, you will be able to tell me that there are lots of people with Irish ancestry in Argentina. Right? It's not just you. There are many people with that connection. And then after that, then it's going to be Irish dance.
Sorry, I thought I had my microphone on, but yes, you are right. We are many of Irish descent here in Argentina.
Yeah, yeah, and even in places like Spain and Holland, you know, like, I'm sure if you do some research, you will find some people maybe going back along. But anyway, it'd be interesting if there was an Irish connection somewhere going back along. Then session 4, this is another one that was suggested by one of you after the first session. So traditional Irish song and dance, and then some rebel songs. So it's 2 separate topics in the one evening. And then term 1, block 3, the Celtic revival, the GAA Irish cultural revival. Rivers, mountains and lakes. Then the Irish Land League, which is a very interesting one about like the political movement of small tenant farmers, you know, how they got to buy their own land. It's a very long and very sad, very difficult story, but this time it's an Irish historical story where the Irish come out on top at the end. So that makes a nice change. And then, yeah, so Cross the Cray is like love for land, right? So people use that expression in English as well, even though it's an Irish term, it's a term from Gaelic. And then Bridget Cleary is a very interesting story as well. She was the last woman to be tragically burnt for witchcraft in Ireland. So these are the sessions that are coming up. If there are any other sessions that you want to do, or if some of them are ones that you're not interested in and that you would prefer another one, please let me know. You can either message me on Teams, or messaging me on Teams is probably the best way to get in touch. If you can message me on Teams. Otherwise, you can send me an email. Okay, guys, so thanks very much for coming tonight. Hope to see you.
Thank you.
Next week as well. Okay, thank you, Akane. Yeah, we also, by the way, we have a group of Japanese people from Osaka University that are going to be joining us in a couple of weeks' time. So I think there are maybe 3 or 4 people from Osaka, from the university there, who are going to be joining us for these sessions. So you won't be the only Irish person, Akane. And maybe Akane, maybe even in Japan, there are some Irish connections there. Who knows? Who knows?
Who knows?
We get around.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thanks very much for coming and for listening. And
Thank you.
I will post the recording, the video recording, onto session 3 in Teams as well. And then I'll also put it in another place for those of you who cannot access the folder on Teams. Okay?
Okay.
Right, guys, bye. Thanks very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.